Hello, everybody. Welcome to the webinar. Just going to let a few more people in, and then we'll get started. Okay, I think there's probably still a few more people to join, but let's get started. Thank you very much for joining us. My name is Rob Jones. I'm hosting a series of webinars this autumn about the IC Index, which you might have seen was published earlier this year. If you're not too familiar, the IC Index is in its third year now. It's a piece of research between IOIC and Ipsos Carrion and Box into employees' perceptions of internal comms, what they think works well, and perhaps where things could be improved. So, as we've done for the past couple of years as well, we've taken four of the key themes from the IC Index research, and we're looking at those over webinars over the next few months. If I remember, I'll tell you what the other three are at the end as well, but this one is about empathetic leadership. So we'll chat about that. I'll just introduce our panelists in a moment, but if you've got any questions, please pop them in the chat. We'll either ask them at the end or we might ask them throughout if they're relevant to what the conversation is at the time. Ideally, if you keep yourselves on mute, that would be fantastic. And this will be recorded, so it will be on demand. So if you need to step away or you want to share it with any other members, it will be online probably in the next 24, 48 hours. So keep an eye out for that on the IOIC website. So I've got excellent panel of guests. I've got David Cook, who's change and engagement lead at the Home Office, Candy Hall, who is senior internal communications and engagement manager for TUI UK and Ireland, and Tom Abbott, who is managing partner at 44 Communications. So welcome the three of you. Thank you very much for joining us. So I'm going to run through some of the sort of key findings from the index, and I'll sort of come to you and ask your opinions. And I guess one of the key things is that only about half, 51% of UK employees feel that their leaders understand the challenges that they face. So I guess where do you think this sort of empathy gap comes from? That there are, half of the workforce doesn't really feel that their senior leaders understand where they're coming from. So David, perhaps if I come to you first, where do you think that might be an issue? Where's that arisen from?
So I think I would start with visibility. I think we were just talking, weren't we, as we were gathering as a panel, to say that it's really challenging for leaders at the moment. Lots of issues around finances, and rightly their focus is on making sure that the business is working properly, and so it can often seem a lower priority to be going out to your people and engaging with colleagues. So I think there's a fundamental point about visibility, and obviously it then turns into something about the actual quality of that engagement. So when senior leaders are engaging with colleagues, what kind of interaction are they having? And if they're senior leaders are very busy people, and I think that most colleagues understand that their senior leaders are doing really busy jobs, and their focus is rightly on the business and running a good business. So to be really empathetic isn't about being matey and cracking jokes on calls. It's about showing that you care about the issues that your colleagues are facing, whether that's cost of living, whether that's issues with technology internally. And it's being seen as a leader to be listening to those concerns and to responding to them. So I think one of the things that we try to do in the Home Office, where we employ 55,000 people, obviously it's a bit of a challenge for our senior leaders to go out and to engage with that many people all at the same time. So we try to do lots of live streaming of events where we can really extend reach, and it's that quality of interaction where you can, via a live stream, feel that the senior leader is actually talking in a fairly informal and intimate way, but is being able to reach a large group of people.
And Candy, do you have anything to add to that? Because I guess in your workforce as well, I suppose there's lots of people who are not kind of office based and online to sort of read those messages, so they might feel even slightly more removed from the leadership. So do you sort of sense that that's another reason why this empathy gap might be missing? And I guess how do you try and show empathetic leadership in the work that you do?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, isn't it? Because I think empathy is something that you feel, and it's something that's missed as soon as people kind of miss that. As soon as there's not the empathy there, they notice it straight away, and the tone changes completely. I think that the gap exists because our leaders and our sort of senior leaders, the board, they live in a very different world. They're looking in the big picture. They're already on the change curve or change flat, whatever we kind of perceive it to be now, they don't necessarily feel the day to day in the same way that employees do. And I think often, when you're receiving comms from a senior leader, if you don't have the right internal comms involvement, you tend to get very heavy kind of strategy, numbers, detail. It doesn't always connect to kind of the lived experiences of people or resonate with their day to day. So yeah, I think it's a culture piece where our leadership team are kind of, they're rewarded by decisiveness, speed, pace. But I think the listening and the humility and the empathy side is secondary. And that's when you get this split between people thinking, well, they just don't get it, or they're not like me, or they're different. And for me, it's how do you bridge that gap with humility so you're still assertive, decisive, you're still controlled, but people still feel like you perhaps can't necessarily empathize, but at least understand or show willing to connect.
And Tom, have you got anything to add to that in terms of what you kind of feel like empathetic leadership actually means? What is it that employees kind of want when, if they want an empathetic leader, what does that actually kind of look like?
Yeah, I think David made a point about this that there was a phrase that came across the other day, which was around corporate love bombing, and that's exactly what it isn't.
Yeah.
It's not about that sort of over emotional, over sort of dripping with kind of emotional connection piece. It's about I always think that empathetic communication starts with listening with care before you start communicating with care. And I think what colleagues want is not necessarily, it's about, do I feel listened to? Do I feel included? Does my experience feel considered when decisions are being made or actions are being taken? And I think there's a kind of point around empathetic leadership doesn't mean avoiding difficult things. Actually, it's often the kind of kindest and caring means having the difficult conversation. It's doing it in a way that is respectful and taking into consideration that kind of experience that colleagues will have. And I think we've got to be sort of careful that I always worry in this debate that empathy becomes a tool, a technique, and I think empathy, the risk here is that leaders start to think about empathy as a kind of as a technique for engaging with people, and if empathy lacks sincerity, then actually it's just going to breed cynicism. So I think it's something that leaders probably need to think quite deeply about and not just sort of dive two-footed into. It takes practice, it takes skill, it's something that takes time to develop, and it needs investment in order to be authentic and to be honest. And in a busy world, you can't just spend 2 hours a month thinking, right, this is my empathy time. It doesn't work like that. It has to be, it's something that is a practice.
And I guess it might be a skill that maybe some leaders don't feel maybe they haven't, if they've had sort of managerial training or that they've sort of brought up, don't feel it's something that's part of what they need to do. Because I think one of the other interesting findings was that most leaders, 94% of them in the research, felt that they have strong communication skills. But obviously, if 51% of employees think they're not being empathetic, then do you think, I guess, Candy, I'll come to you. Do you think that maybe some leaders don't feel that empathy is necessarily one of their skill requirements, or that for some reason they think it might show not necessarily a weakness, but you touched on earlier about the need to still deliver with authority. Do you think that there's still a sense that leaders don't feel empathy is something that they traditionally have done in the past?
I think it's a really interesting question. I think that, you know, I don't necessarily think that they don't feel that it's something that they should do. It's perhaps something that just isn't natural to them, or they can't necessarily resonate with that group of people. And I think if you look at perhaps why they think they do comms very well, if you take an SLT, for example, and they are, sending out a monthly newsletter, they're doing their vlog, they're doing their town halls, they're showing up in all the right places, they feel like they're good communicators because they are communicating. How often as internal comms professionals do we get sent something and they say, I've written this, can you just send it out? And you look at it and you go, oh no, that's not the one. it doesn't make you a good communicator because you're communicating. So I think it's that, they may feel that, but what our role is to kind of show them that, okay, like this works, but here's actually how you connect people to that. Here's how you define your audiences, because not everyone feels the same as you, and not everyone responds in the same way as you to that information. And it's taking them on a journey as well, right? Because in that kind of leadership culture, you are at a senior position, you are having very difficult conversations, very senior conversations, you're moving with different people. And perhaps in David's world, if you've got, was it 55,000 people, you are going to feel so different to those who are perhaps on the floor or in, more junior roles. It's about how do they take themselves out of that and start connecting that dot, and how do they use the expertise of their comms team to help them thread that through, so when those difficult messages land, the empathy is already there, they're already showing up in that way. Much like Tom said, you can't just switch it on. It's something that they need to build over time.
David, could you sort of expand on that in terms of what you think also, I guess, empathetic leadership looks like? Because there was evidence from the research as well that, and I'm sure we agree with this, that comms is more trusted when some of the words that we used were inspiring and or authentic and caring. And we've talked about the importance of caring comms, but what does that actually look like? And I guess every leader is different because they have different energies and they have different ways of presenting themselves. And we wouldn't want an entire SLT team to, be exactly the same. But is it about the energy? Is it about the way they speak to people? Is it the language that they use and trying to remove jargon? What are sort of simple ways that you think that we can try and coach leaders to just try and inject some of that inspiring energy that employees are looking for?
So yeah, I think we often tend to make the assumption that all senior leaders are really great communicators in all ways, and it varies hugely in line with the personality of the individual leader. So I've worked with leaders who are really wooden when they're speaking to large groups of people, but on a small group basis, they really come to life. So I think it's about finding the right forum for that particular leader. And if there's a leader that really doesn't like doing those big staged events, then find ways that they can interact with smaller groups. But then maybe you can actually amplify that interaction. So you might want to record it, for example, if they're meeting with a small group of people. I think one of the things that we found in the Home Office that's worked really well is where you can try to show the human behind the role. So when we look at our senior leaders, we look at them as being really professional, really expert, but we don't often see that they're humans like the rest of us. And we've done some really interesting work where we've actually gone behind the scenes and we've taken videos of what the actual day looks like for that senior leader, starting from when they arrive in the building to when they leave. And that gives you the opportunity to really go behind the scenes, and for example to ask them what they're thinking about just before they go out and they speak to a large group of people. So it's that sort of off-camera view that shows that they're a bit vulnerable, they're feeling a bit nervous about this, just like we would when we're talking to a large group of people, and that can really help to humanize them and really help to build those connections that I think otherwise we often struggle to see.
Mm. And Candy, I guess in your relationships with leaders, either in your current company or over the years, have you had any situations where you've really faced a barrier, and then either some people were quite resistant to try and be vulnerable, or some people just didn't get it? Or do you have any advice, if others come up against that, how you maybe coach a leader to just sort of understand the benefits of being a little bit more open, being a little bit more empathetic? What would you say to somebody who's sort of really struggling to get through to their leader?
Um, I guess I've been in quite a privileged position that I've never really struggled to get them to understand the need to do it, perhaps struggled with their ability to do it more so. Um, but I think there's a number of ways that we can do that. So one is data. We internal comms, it's well known that data is much more difficult for us to obtain than perhaps some of the other creative industries. But by able to show them how people are engaging, responding, I think really helps show them. So start small. One of the best leaders I worked with, this was back when I worked at Virgin Atlantic, he never used to get his PA to buy him a coffee. He would always go and buy his own coffee in the queue. And that meant that he could stand there and have a chat with whoever was in the queue at the time. And he would often buy them a coffee at the same time, and he learnt about them. Therefore, he was able to walk around the floor and bump into David and say, "Oh, did you see the Liverpool score at the weekend?" I don't know if you're a Liverpool fan, David, but he had kind of common interests and he really took note. He would ask about holidays, he would ask about his children, their children, but would also talk about his. So you've really got a sense that you actually knew him as a person. Um, and that was always well received. And that wasn't necessarily something we could show in data, but we could show in moments because people would approach him and ask. And, when we would have these live chats, somebody would always ask, how's your team doing? Or how did your kid do at their school play? And what it meant was that people really actually started to know him in a personal level. uh, Obviously he didn't reveal everything he didn't want to, but there were, you started to see a little bit of himself, that humanizing factor, so that when he did have to deliver tough messages, when he did have to go through change, when there was something that needed a bit more of an empathetic touch, it wasn't about him being continually empathetic. It was about him being continually authentic, human. And when those messages came, people believed him. People trusted him. And it really helped us because we could show those points along the journey. We could build from those small moments, say that actually really works well. When you open up on our next quarterly, let's talk a little bit. Let's make a joke about your team versus the other board members' team, or let's use that, build on it gradually. And I think the more they see the positive response, the easier it is to start taking them on that journey.
Mm. And Tom, yeah, you go on. I was just going to ask if you've got any sort of similar experiences, but yeah.
I was gonna come in on that because I find it odd that people seem to be very accepting that when a leader takes on a senior position, we're quite happy to put them in front of media training, and we're quite happy to put them in front of investor training. And I've been in situations where people have been in front of select committees, and we will drill them for hours on how to present in front of a select committee. But when it comes to speaking to employees, it's often sort of, we don't it's not that it doesn't receive the same sort of attention and practice. And it feels to me that it's as critical that we help leaders, because to the point made earlier, we can't assume that they're just naturally good at engaging with people. And particularly if you compare to media training or investor training, where there's a very particular mask or mask you're going to put on to be able to do that. It's that sense of, well, helping people do that, to speak to colleagues in an authentic and honest way about themselves, particularly if to get to this point, to get to be a senior leader, you often have to protect certain things, and we're asking people to take those protections down and start to engage with people. That's quite challenging and difficult. And so, I've worked with an incoming chief exec who at a sort of major FTSE 100 company, and we spent a long time just sitting in a protected space, in a safe space where we try different things, we explore different elements of their background, we help them not create a voice, but find a voice and find a way of speaking that they felt really comfortable with and natural with. I think the risk, and just as a kind of counter to that, is I've also worked with seniors who let that kind of informality go too far and actually ended up making statements in a kind of public forum that they felt was quite informal, actually ended up with them having to attend multiple DEI training sessions because of what they'd said. And they'd let it get too far. And I think we've got to there are dangers in there as well that we've just got to be alive to.
Yeah, it's quite an important point, I think, that you make, that there's they're very different audiences, and that a leader or anybody who's very comfortable and very engaging speaking to customers or to the press, there's a certain tone that they take. They might be quite salesy, or they might be quite trying to avoid risking saying anything that they shouldn't, obviously, other than in the informal example that you just made. And that's quite a different tone that you take when you're talking to employees, because you're not selling to employees and you don't want to sort of hide too much back. So I think you can't, as you say, you can't adopt the same kind of voice that you would talk externally as you would internally. And I think we sort of touched on it earlier about this need to sort of balance being, I guess, corporate and, being a respected leader and showing your authority in the organization, but also still showing that you are, one of the people. And I guess Tom, if you can sort of expand on what you were saying earlier, how do you sort of get that balance between showing that you are, if that's how you feel it should be, showing that you are still one of the leaders of an organization, but also that you're one of the same people. I mean, there's a sort of a them and us, but also you don't want a them and us as well. So it's a fine line to strike, I think.
It is a fine line, and I think it sort of it it asks about, well, where does my authority come from? Because if my authority is coming from a corporate tone and a sort of a position, then that might be that maybe that's more, if that's where you feel your authority is coming from, then that's maybe more of a problem than actually saying, I am here, I'm here to help people perform, to be their best, to create an environment where people can thrive and be exciting. And I am in order to do that, I have to understand what people are, where people are, what is affecting them, and that sort of sense of, I think, Candy mentioned it around, we're all in it together. This is this is why we are all here. And I guess it's asking a question around, well, what do we want leaders to be doing? It's I'm, if I'm in an ivory tower and I'm passing judgment on things and making decisions on things, and that's never connecting. And if I'm not visible, if I'm not out there doing things, then how can I as a leader ever hope to represent the organization that I'm part of? Um, so I think it's I don't see it as being problematic that um, I can't be a leader and be a person of the people. I don't understand. I don't get why there is that deep separation. I can't sort of think that to be successful in either sphere, that stepping into the organization and being fully part of it is wrong. It doesn't. I don't. It's just part of the job. It has to be.
Just on that. Sorry.
Sorry, go ahead, David. You go ahead.
No, I was just listening to that, and I remember working with a senior leader a few years ago, where we were going through a major change program, and this senior leader was so invested in the change program that he would stand up and speak to colleagues, and then he would start choking up, and he would become tearful, and it got to the point where it was actually quite uncomfortable for the audience. So there are instances where actually being overly empathetic, overly vulnerable can send the wrong signals, because ultimately, even though your colleagues want you to be empathetic, they also want you to be in control. And if you show that you're losing control and you aren't able to lead from the front when it gets really tough, then that can be quite difficult. And just sorry, while I've got the floor, one of the examples that I would give of things that we've done to show to be able to strike that balance between being empathetic but also showing that the leader is really in control is we launched a series of actual conversations where we pitched the senior leader speaking to one of the external stakeholders of the organization on a sort of one-to-one level, very informal level, and we live streamed that conversation. And what's really great about that format is that it shows the senior leader being right on top of their brief, being respected by the external stakeholder, knowing their stuff, but it also shows them being able to flex and to be really informal in that conversation, and to actually speak like a sort of ordinary person. And that we found has been a really nice way to strike that balance.
Mm.
And Candy, is that something that you're sort of thinking about in your organization when you talk to leaders? Because as you mentioned, there's this sense that you're all in it together, but obviously there's also a sense that this leadership team are the ones that everybody else will turn to when things need to get going and when decisions have to be made. So I guess, yeah, as Tom and David has said as well, there's this balance to strike between, being all equal, but also, there needs to be a bit of authority and there needs to be a bit of control from the leadership team. And do you think that's down to just the language or the way that people speak to each other or the channels that you use?
I think it has to be a bit of everything, to be honest. And, I was listening to both Tom and David's points, and they really resonate. And I think, but all of these words have like a counterpart, right? You can be authoritative, but not respected. So having authority doesn't mean that people respect you and they believe you. And I think being one of the people, again, you can have empathy, but it doesn't mean that you share a lived experience. And I have an example of that from a previous world when there was a message that went out about returning to office. Lots of people, I think we've all gone through the similar things. And one of the leaders that was driving that, was in a privileged position. They are a more senior position of the team. They were in a fortunate position that their partner didn't have to work. They were in a fortunate position that they could afford childcare, and they lent in too much. It's like I'm one of the people. Like I get you, and actually they weren't, because they weren't facing the same challenges as somebody that's on minimum wage or that doesn't have a partner or has caring responsibilities or can't afford childcare. So actually, what happened then was they really divided themselves from the people, because you're not one of us, you're not experiencing these same situations and problems that I have. And I think that's where we, you know, have to accept that they aren't one of the people, but they are a person. And so where you approach those things, it's how you make it real to your scenario. So on the flip side of that, the HR lead that was working through it did really well and kind of owned the fact that this wasn't easy. She kind of made jokes about the fact that not jokes, but she made light of the fact that the team were kind of working crazy on this, and it wasn't a fun time to be in HR, but they were absolutely doing their best to make sure that the changes were as easy as possible for people, acknowledged that they were going to be hard for some, but then pointed them to directions of things that could help and support that they could get. And I think that struck the right chord, because it didn't say, yeah, I get it, like, oh, I'm one of you. It asserted the fact that they were playing a leading role in this. They acknowledged their team and the work behind it, and that it was difficult. They acknowledged that it's harder for some, and then they offered a level of support. And I think that resonated so much more because it's practical and it's believable. It's not just this show of like, oh yeah, I'm one of you, when you're not. Um, so yeah, I think it's mixing all of those things. Like, when you look at channels, and it doesn't really matter whether you're doing that in writing or in person. Sure, like our physicality changes, tone changes, but the empathy and how you come across in that way, that's what matters, not necessarily the channel that you're using, like person that you don't believe.
Yeah, you and David both sort of touched on change programs there as well, and I'll sort of give you a stat here from the IC index as well. So 56% of the employees who responded felt that difficult changes like restructures and redundancies were communicated with care. So it's only just over half who feel that they were spoken to in a caring way. And when those employees that did feel care, 83% of them felt valued, and those who didn't, only 32% did. So obviously we've talked about empathetic leadership, and I suppose maybe we've talked about on a general basis and try and do it in a business as usual way. But does anything change when you have like a change scenario or transformation, and maybe something that is going to have quite a significant impact on people, like redundancies? Do you have to ramp it up? How do you sort of ramp it up and sound authentic? And how do you talk about those changes in an empathetic way when, for example, some people may be losing their jobs or their teams may be restructured? David, I guess I'll come to you first. Can you think about how you might think of things in a slightly different way when you coach leaders to communicate during a big change?
Yeah, it's. I think a lot of it is about. Well, it's a number of different factors. Firstly, I'd say your comms need to be timely. You need to. You shouldn't wait as a senior leader to go out until everything's organised and sorted, and all of the details have been worked out. You need to engage with people when they're in a space of anxiety and they're worried about the future. So you need to be really timely in your comms and get in there early. You need to show as a senior leader that you're listening. And by listening, it's not just sort of being trite and say, I'm listening to your concerns. It's actually being willing to actually put yourself out there and to answer the really difficult questions without it being sort of scripted in advance. So to demonstrate, to show that you are being willing to really put yourself out there. But really crucially, I think there's something about acknowledging that the change is going to be really difficult, but also giving some sense of optimism, about the sunny uplands to come. There has to be some vision that inspires and motivates and engages people for the future to be able to work through whatever's happening on the change front that might be really challenging, and to acknowledge that there'll be some people in the organisation that may not be here in the future. That's the reality. But you have to be able to paint a vision of the future that is also exciting to motivate people to work through it, because it can often be really challenging. There has to be some light at the end of the tunnel.
And Tom, at 44, when you've worked with clients, I guess perhaps on change programs, is there anything that you kind of think differently as you approach the way you advise clients or the way that you roll out sort of campaigns and channels, that is just about whether it's the tone of voice you use and any kind of transformation, which is obviously going to be slightly disruptive? Is there something that you have in the back of your head that you think this is kind of an important principle that we should apply to this particular program because it's a change program?
Yeah, I think often the sort of the same principles apply to change communications as to regular communications. It's just that the degree of focus and intent is so much more intense. And I think it's what people are looking for is it's not about softening the blow. It's about really being clear and honest, and to David's point, timely, and not dodging the difficult conversations. I think often, particularly with change programs, it's there's a sort of within a kind of change team to not to try and sideline the naysayers or the people who may have an or may object or have difficult kind of feedback. And actually it's making the time to acknowledge and really listen to that and respond to it and be seen to be kind of engaging is really, really important through these programs, because otherwise it's being done to rather than done with, and that's a really hard place to be. And I think it's that empathy without honesty is just empty and hollow. And if we're not prepared, if we're prepared to be empathetic when things are good, then we should be prepared to be empathetic when things are difficult. And if as soon as things get difficult, we ditch that part of us, then we're being incredibly dishonest, and that's not a good thing to do.
Mm. I wanted to move on to chat a little bit about, I guess, the frequency of communication as well. So throughout the IC Index, what kind of came out at the end was really what a 10 out of 10 experience looks like for employees. And when that was sort of formulated, that data, 72% of employees said that they hear from their CEO at least every few weeks. So I guess, Candy, coming to you in-house, do you have any thoughts as to how you, I guess, schedule communication from either your CEO or from your leadership team? Are you kind of aware of them talking too much, or do you think about we need to get more in or we need to get a little bit less? How do you think about how much communication they have, and where you sort of move from it being kind of constant and being too much to being genuinely authentic?
Yeah, so we have done a lot of work recently on our comms cadence. It will come as no surprise that our colleagues feel that they are over communicated to. TUI is a very matrixed organization, so you'll have your UK and I comms, and then you have your global comms, and then you have your transformation comms and your customer comms and everything else that piles on top of people. So we try to have a really clear, defined strategy for our board communications, and we've tried to embed that, we know you're getting a lot. If you can't read everything, or you can't watch everything, these are the things, these are kind of your core moments. And for us, it's about consistency. So um, it's like being concise with your message, but being consistent. So when you look at, we were just talking about the honesty and transparency with change communications, that's really hard to do sometimes, because you can be honest about some things, but as a leader, there are always things that you can't say. Maybe for legal reasons, HR reasons, it might not be signed off. You might fundamentally not agree with the decision that's being made, but you still have to lead and present that you do. So it's finding the bits that you can be honest with, having the integrity to kind of stand behind that, and then having like the skill to say, you know what? I don't know all of the answers to this. We're still working on it, but we hope to have an outcome by the end of the month. Then at the end of the month, it's that consistency to come back and either give the update or be able to say, I still don't have it. We're working on it, but I want to come back to you. And I think that's sometimes what people miss. We'll make commitments. We'll use our senior leaders to make a commitment that they're going to update or they've ongoing work. And then it falls off a cliff and it falls silent and people don't hear about it again. Sometimes saying that you have nothing to say fills more of a void than just leaving this echo where people are left to make their own assumptions or, comments. And I think for me, that has been a real strength. We have quite a new board in the UK and I at TUI. There's only one actually that has been in existence for more than a year. So it's very fresh, lots of embedding. But I believe that's one of the real sort of USPs that they have is that they regularly update and they regularly impart a little bit of humanity in that. So we'll always start with a reflection on something that's happened, a visit to a shop, a personal moment of a holiday. There's always that personal element. So yeah, I think it's about consistency, regular cadence, not overflowing, but ensuring that people find that content really valuable and they know that that's where they get, what they absolutely need to know.
And David, I guess it's similar in your organization that you must have a lot of channels and a lot of comms and a lot of emails. So I guess coming back to the point about being empathetic in the way you communicate or leaders communicate, how conscious are you of that in sort of everything? Do you feel like you constantly need to be caring and empathetic in every message that goes out, or do you tailor it for different channels? So sometimes if a message goes out and you think, oh, that's not very caring, would you let it go and think, well, that's fine. We can't be caring all the time, otherwise it sounds a bit forced. Or do you think, no, our tone of voice is that we should be caring and empathetic. So if this is too formal or this is too jargony or this doesn't sort of hit the right note, we'll have to revise it. So what are your thoughts generally on the on how much empathy you kind of put across all channels?
Well, in terms of senior leadership comms, I think it's just being consistent. I think if you start to flex and say I'm going to speak in one tone of voice with this audience and a different tone of voice for another, you get found out, and you get really confused as an internal comms function as to which audience you're supposed to be talking with at which time in what kind of language. So being consistent, I think is the key. Just touching on the point about frequency. In my experience, although you're absolutely right, Candy, that there's a huge amount of noise in organisations, but most of that noise isn't coming from senior leaders, in my experience. And actually, there's a huge appetite to hear more from senior leaders from the very top of the organisation. But it has to be the right kind of content for your senior leaders. So I remember working with a leader recently who had come into the organisation and was really keen to engage on a regular basis with colleagues, and so would do a sort of almost daily update about what they'd done. So I met with so and so, and I saw this team in operation. It was fantastic, and they would share a photo, and it would be great, and it was really popular. But a lot of the feedback that we got when we were looking to get some feedback was that's great, and I'm really starting to see the human behind the role. But I also want to hear about strategy occasionally. So maybe every month, maybe you could do less frequent, maybe do fewer of those daily comms, which are talking about sort of your day your interactions with colleagues, and then go out on a regular basis, say monthly, with an update on strategy. Where's the organisation going? What's your vision? How is that coming to life? So it's about that blend of, here I am as your leader. This is what I get up to on a daily basis, but I have a plan, and this is the vision, and we're working through that, and this is where we've got to.
Candy,
Sorry.
No, Candy, I was going to say, is there anything in TUI that, following on from David's point, that works really well, that gets a good response from what leaders do, whether it is, the site visits, for example? Would you say to anybody else here, if your CEOs or leaders are not doing enough site visits, they are really worth it, despite the effort that goes into getting people to travel, or simple things like blogs or videos? What kind of goes down really well with employees for you?
Yeah, I'll always say that site visits are worth the time. I think putting faces to names is just such an important thing if you can do that. Like with David, you can't get out to 50,000 people, but if you can get out and start, mingling, I think it really helps. I also think it really helps you understand from the floor of the business what's important and helps tailor what you need to do and how people are feeling about your communications. A couple of things that have worked really well here. Look, I'm not going to pretend these are revolutionary. They're not, brand new techniques that no one's ever heard of, but they are working really well because we've implemented them well. So we had a problem where we were very top down. So we would communicate and then off you go, you read it, you deal with it, you act on it. But what we weren't doing was engaging our kind of middle management and some of the senior leaders. So they would then find outcomes at the same time as their teams, which makes it quite difficult to be able to support that or talk with confidence and narrative around that. So we created a manager's update, which is targeted to our kind of managers and above. It gives them more information than perhaps we give to like the wider business. It clearly states things that they need to action, tips, things for them. It has some investment for them, so like learning and development things that kind of, that's really targeted to them, not just a generic approach. But the piece that goes down really well is that we always open it from a different senior leader with a vlog and a short intro. And the idea is that it's sometimes a board member, but actually we move around and we use different SLT to help raise their profile, to build confidence in certain areas as well, because the board don't always know everything about everything in the same way that some of their teams do. But it's become a really well received. We got 9.6 out of 10 when we did a short poll on how people are finding it, and the vlog scored particularly high. And I think that's because they're actually hearing about strategy, about things that impact them. It's given them time to absorb it ahead of their team so that they can then continue that message. And it's allowing them to be spoken to in more of a structured way at their level rather than the generic comms that we're sending out to a wider audience. So I think that's one of the things that's gone down really well. And the second, again, not pretending this is revolutionary, but we never listened. We did an engagement survey. We all know how they work, but we did town halls, we did vlogs, we did newsletters, but we didn't listen. So we've set up bi-monthly Q&As with the board. We open questions early, so people on shifts who can't join in person still have the opportunity to be heard. We allow anonymous questions, so if people are feeling uncomfortable about certain things, they still have that, opportunity to speak. And we also believe that enables the board to actually hear how people really feel and not this kind of prettied up version of what they want to hear that people are feeling comfortable to say. It gives them a really raw look at the business. It's sometimes really difficult. We've had some really difficult messages, and this is, I think, where we've really had to work on our empathy and delivery. And I actually really like Tom's point. And actually, Tom, I'm going to hit you up after this to discuss the training and investment in how you present to colleagues rather than journalists and, external people. We've had to do a lot of work with them to bring empathy, to be honest, to bridge, to direct them to information that's already there they might not know about. But it's been hugely successful. Not always positive, but I don't think that that's always the desired outcome, right? It's about the authenticity, building that trust, having that openness on a regular, consistent basis, so that when the bigger things drop, people already know that they're willing to discuss these things. People also know that there's going to be an opportunity to ask difficult questions in an environment where they can't do a politician answer. They can't think about it and write to them later. It's very in the moment and very raw. So those, as I say, not revolutionary in terms of the practice, but the delivery and the way that it's done, I think has completely transformed the way that we communicate and engage with our colleagues.
Candy, I was just going to say, I'm glad that you mentioned listening, Candy, because that's what I was about to talk about next. Because part of the research showed that, again, just over half, 53% of employees felt that their organization doesn't show how their feedback is being used. I know it's a bit of a common "you say we did" kind of conundrum, and everybody should probably know how to do it. But according to this, almost half of employees don't feel that their organizations are. So, Tom, coming to you, can you sort of put that in the context of being an empathetic organization and a caring organization, how important it is to firstly, listen and get the feedback in the first place, but then also just demonstrate what you're doing with it. And again, Candy mentioned earlier, sometimes it's best to even just say, we didn't do anything with it, or I can't tell you anything now. But can you sort of sum up how listening is such an important part of being a caring and empathetic organization?
I think it's essentially listening is the fundamental building block of empathy. It's if you're not listening and you're not because we can't be everywhere all the time, but we can listen. And if we're not listening to people's experiences, opinions, and people feeling heard, then we are fundamentally not giving ourselves a foundation from which to be empathetic. But I think we've spoken a lot about caring and empathy and listening. But if none of that comes with action, then it's then people won't believe it. We are just being kind we're being nice for the sake of it, rather than, if we continually listening and we continually do these things and then nothing ever happens, there's no change, there's no impact, there's no influence, there's no outcome to it. Then people will stop believing, and people will, colleagues will start to kind of disconnect from that. So I think it's really critical that to be a caring organization, you have to listen, to reflect, to acknowledge, and then be able to demonstrate that something is happening because of it. Because we have engaged in this act, because we have had this conversation, because we've had this act of listening and interaction, that the organization is different, that things are changing, that things are improving because of that interaction. So we have to be able to tell people, we have to be able to sort of show either where that listening and that caring is making a difference, or, to Candy's point, if there are reasons why we cannot act on something, then we explain that, or we are transparent in the challenges perhaps in making certain things happen. But otherwise it comes back to this idea of corporate love bombing. We're doing all of this stuff, but we're doing it because it's a performative act, not because it is truly influencing the way that we do things.
And go on, Candy. Yeah.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I really agree. And I think when you talk about the "you said we did," it's got such a bit of a reputation, hasn't it, of like a dusty days of old. And it's you said you wanted different coffee in the kitchen, and now we've done it, and they kind of fall off. We are trying to reframe that a little bit, because I do still think that it's one of the easiest and most valuable ways to feedback. And next year we're going to be launching a "we said we did." And I think it's going to be really valuable as we move through transformation and change. And the idea of that is, we've recently launched our strategy. As these things go, there was a big fanfare, there was videos, town halls, the whole thing was, it was very exciting. This is the direction of the future. And then we kind of stop, you don't get that continuous flow. So the idea is that we then say in our strategy, we say we're going to sell X amount of holidays by this date. A few months into that, we should then be updating and saying, well, so far we have sold this amount of holidays, and we're either really pleased with this and we're going to keep doing, or actually this is a problem, so this is how we're reshaping. And then in the next 3 months, we're actually on target or we're not. So it's that finding the points of things that the board or the leadership team have committed to, and continuing to take people on that journey, because I think that in turn builds trust. You've committed, you've said what you're going to do, you've then followed up and told us how you're doing. You then build the trust that that's actually happening. You acknowledge the teams that are involved, and that trust then eventually leads to people feeling more connected with the board overall, I think.
I think there's something else sorry.
No, go on, Tom.
I just think there's something else in the kind of in this point about "you said we did," is there's no sort of, it just reinforces that notion that the intelligence and the ability to act sits around a very limited number of people at the top of the organization, rather than actually being within the reach of everybody. And I think it's that sense of, if we often talk with a lot of organizations about people taking accountability and ownership, and that sort of structure just reinforces keeping the intelligence on the bench and not on the field. And I want the smarts on the field supported by the bench, not the other way around.
In sort of internal communicators' role, I suppose, as employee engagement specialists, but also strategic advisors to the board, do you think that there is a role to take for internal comms teams to take feedback that they get from listening sessions and make the suggestions for what should be done? Or do you think they should only be responsible for encouraging the leaders to communicate what has been done? Do you think that internal comms people should be going to leaders and say, look, from this round table or from this Q&A, leaders, employees want this, this, and this, so why don't we try this, this, and this? Or do you think that should just be a senior leader thing? Candy, you're sort of nodding there.
Sorry,
That's an
I'm not
agreement.
very good at hiding my face. I'm working on having a different. Yeah, I absolutely think we should be. I've heard somebody recently saying that, internal comms is often seen as an enabling function, but it's not. It's a strategic function. We advise, we support strategy, we help embed really important things and take people on that journey with us. So yeah, like I I think it's really, really important. That Oh, sorry, I've lost my train of thought now. Sorry, can you repeat the question?
That internal communicators not only are responsible for
Yes,
communicating
sorry.
what was done, but they
So important that I forgot what I was saying. No, I do think it's really important, and I think that it's down to us to bring that to the board or bring that to the SLT and help them understand, because they don't always have time. As both Tom and David have alluded to, they're busy people. They don't always have time to hear what's happening or to learn from the floor. And I think that's where our expertise can really come in. And yes, some of that change they have to bring about, and no, we can't be responsible for everything. But I think a core part of us listening and learning is encouraging them to try new things, to be responsive to their audience, to let the business know that they hear them. And something I wrote down, and sorry, I'm making notes as we go, but something I wrote down on an earlier point that I think is still relevant is they shouldn't be afraid to backtrack. People always, when big decisions are made, I think sometimes leaders feel like they have to stand behind that regardless. If you have a barrage of people or all your community, your audiences, they come to you and they strongly disagree. I think it's okay, not necessarily to change completely on what you're doing, but it's okay to say, you know what, we hear you. We're going to relook at this. And then use your internal comms people to say, like, how can we address this? What changes can we make? We still need to do this, but is there something we can do that will make it easier for people? I think that shows empathy, connection, trust, that you're listening and that you're not sat in an ivory tower and you're pushing things down. You're, to Tom's point, the people on the floor, like, use them because they're your eyes and ears. They're the people that are living these experiences day in, day out. Sometimes we all make wrong decisions, and it's okay to say, okay, maybe we went a bit too quick, or maybe this wasn't quite right. Here's what we're going to do. You still can retain authority and respect and, a strong position on something, but still show that you are human and you listen and you empathize and, you can change that.
I think there's another part to that, Candy. Sorry,
no, come
but that's encouraging leaders to ask questions.
Yeah.
Because being curious about people, being curious about the organization, and seeking input more broadly is a really lovely habit to get into. And I think it again, it comes back to the point, demonstrates I don't have all the answers. We don't have all the answers. It's what do other people think? What do you think? What's your experience? And these are simple questions that that people can use that can trigger very powerful conversations. That's a habit I would encourage leaders to get right into, is be more curious and ask lots of questions.
David, I was going to come to you and ask you about sort of extending on those 2 points, really, about this role of internal communicators, which is growing as a strategic advisor to the board. Are you finding that, perhaps gradually, but over the years, the SLT are coming to you for sort of more advice or for opinion about employee sentiment, and that you're able to actually influence decisions in a way as to what would work best for employees? And if so, how are you sort of managing those conversations in terms of, I guess, decisions that are traditionally sort of left up to them, but how are you managing the way and sort of passing on your opinion about convincingly about what employees would relish and benefit?
But I think it depends on the leadership team you're working with. Some
Mm.
leadership teams are more open to having internal comms at the table, and certainly during COVID, we all know that was a real opportunity for internal comms professionals to be at the table and to be advising directly. I think we've lost a bit of the influence since then, so it's not something where you can stand still. You have to prove yourself basically every week, and I think one of the most powerful ways to do that, as we've touched on already, is through data, and showing through data, and not just showing sort of spreadsheets of information. It's as the earlier discussion was also indicating, that you need to come up with recommendations based on the data that are actually feasible and pragmatic and practical, where a senior leader can say, yeah, I can do something about that because I'm time poor. So to go out and say, well, the data says that we want you to be more visible, therefore we think that Exco should go on the road for for 3 months. I mean, that isn't a practical sort of idea. So it's coming up with practical suggestions, but it's constantly having to prove yourself, I think, and building trust with new sets of leaders, because leaders don't stand still. The leadership boards are being refreshed, new people are coming in, and you have to start from scratch the whole time. But I think you're as good as your reputation. So I think if you've built trust with previous leaders, then there are some leaders that stick around that say let's work with internal comms on this because they really add value. So if you can demonstrate that added value, and it's usually through data and insight, then that's a good place to be.
And does anybody have experience of supporting leaders with a variety of, I guess, listening sessions? So I suppose we've touched on a little bit about maybe kind of conferences and events where people might stand up on stage and speak to a large number of people, or all hands meetings, which might be virtual. But have any of you worked with leaders where they've maybe come into smaller sessions of sort of, 8 to 20 people, and how has that sort of worked in terms of, I guess, the response from employees who probably must be grateful to have that visibility, and also the leaders who may have been a little bit apprehensive as to being in a small group? Because I think Candy sort of alluded that sometimes the feedback is not always great, and I know that some leaders don't always want to put themselves in a position where they hear bad news, but obviously people sometimes want to talk about that. So I just wondered if anybody's done any of those kind of smaller sessions and if they worked. Tom, you're nodding.
Yeah, we're currently working with an MD who's dropping into just team meetings and just spending time going around sort of different huddles and team meetings and just being present and hearing what people have got to say. And that's going down really, really well with people because it is more informal, it is more chatty, and he's not frightened to kind of deal with difficult conversations. I've also kind of sponsored listening sessions with teams where we've taken the chief exec and talked to project teams about things. The trick we found with those was actually, it was taking some of the senior managers out of the conversation because they would tend to want to curate the discussion in a particular way. And actually what you're trying to do is try and allow the project team themselves to talk, to have that interaction. And so making sure that those sessions weren't over curated by the team themselves became something actually that needed a bit of coaching to create the right environment where it could be free flowing. But I think those sorts of sessions work really powerfully. And the small group, as long as everyone's kind of teed up for it, can take a little bit of prep because I've done some sessions where you've invited people in and people have sat there for a long time in silence waiting for somebody to be the first one to go over the top and ask the first question. So there is a degree of they need to be kind of carefully managed sessions from a communications perspective, otherwise it can all feel a bit awkward. But when you get the mojo right, they are so powerful because people feel a connection that's very, very difficult to achieve elsewhere.
Yeah, I would completely agree. I think one of my favorite channels that they have at TUI that, they'd already set up, I can take no credit for this, actually. It's one of the members of my team that looks after it. But they have e-coffees and they have a max number of 10 people. And when I came, it's like, oh, we should bring more in. It's really good. But no, we kept it at 10. And the reason is because it's a really intimate setting and it's people that genuinely care about the topic. So every 3 months, we announce the next set of sessions. It's always run by a senior leader, but not necessarily a board member, experts. We give them a topic and they talk for maybe 10 to 15 minutes on that topic. And then it's opened up to the floor for people to ask questions. The NPS on that is phenomenal. Like the feedback, they book up within a day, sometimes within an hour of posting them. And we get really great feedback because it allows people that have a genuine interest in a topic to get the answers in a direct way. They then share that with their teams and their colleagues and it spreads. Sometimes we double up on them if they book so quick and we know it's a real popular topic. But it also allows us to, shine a light on things that perhaps don't need to be communicated to everybody, but the people that are interested really are interested. So yeah, I agree with Tom. Like, I think when you can get those things right, they are just so valuable.
Right.
Just one other example. We've run small group conversations when we've taken the board out on the road and we've had the big town halls and then we've had small group conversations as well. But one of the other things that we've done, which has worked brilliantly, has been to do some spot mentoring. And this obviously only works in small offices, but where you get a chance to pair up literally ones and twos with a board member to talk about their career development, to ask questions about the organisation, about the priorities of leadership. I mean, that is unbelievably powerful because it gives people, even maybe just for 10 minutes, that kind of spot mentoring is absolutely invaluable. And often colleagues can say that was the thing that really made me think about my career, and then it has made me move in a totally different direction. It was thanks to that opportunity. So incredibly powerful.
And similar to that, just one final note, I know we've got to go, but when I've had conversations about reverse mentoring as well, that's worked really well. And the senior leaders have always said that that's a great way of understanding the sort of challenges of different people in their organization and what they're actually going through. So reverse mentoring is another brilliant thing that works. That's an hour, and we probably could have talked for 2 or 3. So thank you so much, David, Candy, and Tom. That's brilliant. I hope everybody else has enjoyed it. Just quickly, there's the rest of the autumn schedule. In October, we're talking about clarity of strategy. In November, we're talking about clarity around AI. And in December, we'll be talking about change comms. So keep an eye on the IOIC's events calendar, because those will be promoted soon. Thanks everybody for joining. Again, as I said, this will be on demand on the IOIC website, maybe tomorrow or Wednesday. So keep an eye on it if you would like to watch it again. So thanks very much. Again, thanks to the panelists. See you next time.
Thank
Cheers all.
you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.